what mercy is and why it's a good thing and how it's difficult. So what I'm going to do is actually just, I want this to be a guided time of reflection and response. And so what I'm going to do is I'm not really going to teach very much. I'm going to just walk through a few different passages, and in each passage and each kind of thought, I'm going to pause and just give space for you all to respond to the Spirit, to let Him do something in you. And so I'll walk us through this time, but just so you kind of know what to expect. So it's going to be less of like lecture, monologue style, and a little bit more interactive, not necessarily between you and me, although I guess if you do want to shout something out, you can do that. But this is more of like, I'm going to be giving you a little something, kind of set the table, and then send you to have a few moments with Jesus by yourself. So what we're going to do is we'll have a passage and kind of just, basically what I want us to do is walk through, I think, 5 steps or 5 ways to become more merciful. So if you've noticed it all throughout this series, what Jesus is doing is he's painting the picture of the good life. Like, no one wants to just live a bad life, but we all have different ideas of how to get there. And so Jesus is saying, I just so happen to create all of this and breathe you into existence, so I kind of might have a little clue about how to operate in a way that's going to be fulfilling and satisfying. And we shouldn't be surprised that everything that comes out of Jesus' mouth in Matthew 5 with these Beatitudes, these blessed attitudes, is just the exact opposite of what you and I, if we were coming up with our own religion, would have. We would not be starting it off with blessed are the poor in spirit. We wouldn't throw the word poor in there at all. And so Jesus is, we look at it and it seems upside down, but really it's right side up. He's showing us the true way to a life of satisfaction and fulfillment, and of living in a way that's beneficial to our world and the earth now. So this is about Jesus' kingdom coming to earth, and this is how Jesus is kicking off this teaching to his disciples. So the first thing, we'll have it up here on the screen, is I think the first way for us to grow in mercy and becoming merciful is realizing this simple but so important reality that God himself is merciful in his character, in his nature. As you heard Jonathan praying, you heard that coming out a little bit. Just this is who God is, his knee-jerk reaction. So I'm going to, you can actually, it'll be here on the screen, but if you actually want to go and open up to Exodus 34, because when we go down in a few moments, we're going to replace that with a few prompts, a few questions. This is an amazing passage. This is God himself talking to Moses when Moses is basically like, so it'd be nice if I could know your name. And then God's like, oh yeah, let me tell you a little bit about who I am. And he says, this is who I am. And this is what comes out of God's mouth to Moses. And then this actually becomes the most quoted passage within the Bible. So this passage gets echoed again and again and again. Like, this is one of those anchor parts of the Bible. Because this is God himself really for the first time giving more texture to who he is. And this is what comes out of his mouth. This is God speaking. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, that's Moses, and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on their children, on the children and their children's children, to the third and fourth generation. This is heavily weighted towards tender compassion. That's actually, amazingly, the first thing out of God's mouth. In his self-description, his autobiography is merciful. And the idea with mercy is that this isn't just simply, not getting what you deserve, as it's sometimes described. This is actually a very emotional word. This is a word of tenderness and compassion, like your heart being warmed and going out to someone. That's where God starts. So regardless of what comes after that, We have to accept, you have to allow that to sink in. Whatever you think about who God is, wherever you're at in your walk with Him, this is where He starts. He's merciful. And it goes on to draw that out in different ways, and then it does, obviously, at the end. You know, he's not pure, just like we were talking about for weeks. He's not a jellyfish, right? Like, His heart is for you to receive His mercy, but if you won't receive it, then there is judgment. And so he's a God of justice, right? He doesn't just let anything fly. He will, make things right. So, but He starts here, merciful, and that doesn't get, washed over by the things that come after. That is first and foremost who He is. If you were to cut God, that's what He would start bleeding out. Tender compassion. So what I want us to do in this first few moments is to reflect on this. The next slide has a few prompts. Again, you've got the passage there if you want to keep it out in front of you. And this is what I want you to spend some time just reflecting on, and even turning this time into prayer or journaling. How do you want to do it? What does it tell you about God? That the first word He uses to describe Himself is merciful. What does that tell you about who God is? And then talk with God about where you're at regarding Him being merciful. And these are just some potential places that you are. Grateful, confused, doubting, inspired. Where are you at? And talk with God about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, we do this oftentimes when we have times of prayer, that kind of thing. If you would like to just get up and move, and we have some space back there. If you want to go get some of your reps in the back, you can do that. If you want to spread out a little bit, you have the freedom to do that. If you want to spend time on your knees, like I said, this is not a sermon today. This is a time of just letting God's word from a few different angles just speak into your life. Okay? So I'm going to give everyone, myself included, a few moments to do this. And once we finish with this, I'll come back up and keep leading us. So if you want to move, you can do that. If you want to stay, you can do that. But take some time with Jesus, letting these kind of be a springboard. right. If you did move back, you can just stay where you are because we're going to keep doing this. So, and if at some point you want to get up and move, you're welcome to do that. So I think that's where a journey in becoming more merciful starts there. That this is who God himself is, his character and his nature. But then I think there's another important aspect in your and my mercy journey, and that is this, and it'll be up on the screen again, that my sin is devastating. That realizing God's mercy to you really only sets into to the degree that you realize the kind of debt that you had. A passage I want to bring our attention to is the very beginning of Hosea. And really, if you've never read the book of Hosea, it's one of these more obscure Old Testament books. It's a little bit difficult to find. If you can find it, then I encourage you to give it a read this week. And even if you are, really familiar with it and you're a Hebrew scholar, then I still encourage you to give it a read this week. It is, you talk about God's mercy, tender compassion. It is one of the most, it's like God's heart is just bleeding for his people and for you and I, and it's pretty moving. But Hosea is, well, I'll just read this verse 2 for us. So this is the very first time that God speaks through Hosea, who's this guy who becomes a prophet to speak God's word to his people. It says, when the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, this was his assignment, go take yourself a wife of whoredom, which isn't that a great, if you were a prophet, that's like, this is where it starts. Go marry a prostitute, essentially, and have children of whoredom. For the land, which is just a Old Testament way to describe the people of God, the covenant people that God has made his own, commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. The rest of the book of Hosea goes on to use this walking, living, breathing picture of Hosea and Gomer, who ends up being his wife, who repeatedly cheats on him, as the picture that God is trying to convey to us about what it means for us to sin. It's so easy sometimes to sanitize sin, to just kind of put it in a box, like it's only like the really, really, really bad stuff that maybe can get you put in jail or something like that. But this is saying the whole attitude of our hearts, regardless of if we've committed any huge capital S sins, or just our hearts that just don't love God to the degree that he made them to, or don't even start thinking about all the stuff that we ought to do that we don't. It's not just the bad stuff that we don't do, it's the good stuff that we don't, and even the good stuff that you can do, but with the wrong motives. It is essentially cheating on God. That's the lens that Hosea gives to us about what sin is. And that's where Hosea starts. Now we'll go on to say a lot more than that, but it sits in that for a lot of the book of Hosea. And so what I want us to do is to sit with that as well. Now, this isn't the last step in the process, but it is there, and it has to be there. Or basically, until you really begin to get even close to, we'll never be able to wrap our minds perfectly around it, but until you even begin to get a close grasp on your debt before God, you will always struggle with mercy. And as you begin to get a grasp on your debt before God, what will naturally begin to grow is mercy towards other people. All right, so I want us to sit with this for a little bit. So the next slide is a couple of, again, prompts questions. How am I currently seeing the speck in someone else's eye while ignoring the log in my own eye? This is drawing one of Jesus' great pictures, parables that he gives to us about this natural inclination in every single human heart to minimize our own rebellion and maximize everyone else's. You're the only one with a halo and everybody else has devil horns. How, for you, again, this is like, I can even start thinking about, well, this is how they do it. This is about you, right? How are you what in other people. And the thing about the speck in someone else's eye is it's legitimately there. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's there. It's a flaw. It's something they're doing wrong too. But what are you? Where do you get caught? Or maybe there's a specific person, that you can just, this is this person. Man, I just, because I look at them and I see how they live or how they talk or what they do or don't do, and I find myself, even just subtly in my spirit, just kind of pressing them down to lift myself up. And then the next is, sin is, among one of the many pictures and ways of describing sin that the Bible gives us, one is that it is having an affair on God. That is going after other gods, giving your heart to other lovers. And so using that, lens, how have I cheated on God? Again, don't think about other people. This is for you. And again, it could be, even it's the small things or the things left undone where your heart hasn't been fully His. So I'm going to give us a few moments again to reflect on that and pray and spend some time with Jesus about that, and then I'll come back up. doesn't land there. It doesn't stay there. Hosea actually goes on to say in Hosea 2, verse 23, among many other things, and I will have mercy on no mercy. What that's talking about is within chapter 1, Hosea goes and marries Gomer. She begins cheating on him and having these kids. And God starts telling him what to name these kids. And they are definitely not on the top 100, hipster names in 2022. One is No Mercy. That's the name of the kid. No Mercy. And I will have mercy on no mercy. And I will say to not my people. That's one of the other kids' names. God's trying to get his point across. Like, look, you don't deserve my mercy. So I'm going to name your kid No Mercy. You have essentially told me that you don't want to be my people anymore either. So you can go ahead and name your kid Not My People. And he says to them, you are my people. And he shall say, you are my God. I will have mercy. God resolves to go through pain, which is what mercy and forgiveness always requires, to be willing to give that to those who would receive it. He is willing to go to his spouse, who he could rightfully divorce and cut off completely and say, I will make you into my people. I will bring you back to me. And that's what God tells Hosea to go and do. And he ends up, Gomer at this point has just like spiraled downward in what seems to be prostitution. And she's just like far from him and far from God. And at this point, it looks like she's for sale, because in chapter 3, it says that Hosea went and he had to buy her. And it tells her how much he had to buy her back for. Like, she was up for auction. He bought her and brought her back to him. And it is God's giving this picture. This is what I'm doing with you. And again, until you see that you are Gomer, that you were Gomer, that without God's intervention and presence, you are Gomer, not just everybody else but you, then you won't be able to actually receive God's mercy and allow it to get into actually change you. And so that's the third kind of movement in becoming merciful, is not only that God himself is merciful, and that's where he starts, and that my sin is devastating, but that God is merciful to me anyways. God has this resolve to put himself through pain, and we ultimately see that through Jesus on the cross, actually giving up his life, actually being broken, and we'll remember that in a few moments, having his body cut open, not just emotionally but actually physically being broken open and poured out for you. God chooses to be merciful to us anyways. Again, I want to encourage you to spend time in the book of Hosea. There's so much more there. But what I want us to do in these next few moments is to reflect on these questions. Thinking back to a time, if you have one, if you're a follower of Christ, you certainly do, but if you can think back to a time, and maybe more distant, maybe more present, how have I personally experienced the tenderness and compassion of God? Maybe there was a time when you really did know that you blew it, and yet maybe it was even through a person or maybe it was just through a moment by his Spirit in you that you can't really describe. It wasn't anything external. How have you experienced the tenderness and compassion of God? And just bringing that to your remembrance. And then also, is there any area of my life that I'm struggling to believe that God could or would have tender or be tender and compassionate? Is there any area of my life that I'm struggling to believe that God could or would be tender and compassionate? So this is towards you, a place you might carry guilt, you might carry shame, or that you might carry like, I've just one too many times this for God. Bringing that to remembrance, bringing that to him. Because if the reality is, though our sin debt is great, right, his mercy is more. His tender compassion goes deeper and further than our sin. And so let's spend a few minutes just reflecting on that, spending time with Jesus about the fact that God chooses and wants to be merciful to us anyways. Jesus, we just take a moment now to just say thank you to you for the fact that you show us the Father. You are the invisible God with skin on, where we get to see who he is through you. And so we thank you for the way that you showed us his heart and how you lived and how you died and how you rose again. for us. Lord, how you would say to us that we're names, no mercy, not my people, and that you would say to us, I will have mercy. You will be my people. And we would say back to you, because you awaken our hearts, we would say back to you, you are my God. Lord, we thank you that, as Hosea goes on to say, that when Israel was a child, I loved him. Out of Egypt I called my son. The more they were called, the more they went away. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and burning offerings to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up by their arms, but they did not know that it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of kindness, with bands of love. And I came to them as one who eases the yoke on their jaws. And I bent down to them and fed them. God, thank you for your heart and tender compassion for us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. And out of God being merciful to us, we're going to look at a passage that actually really, it's God's way of saying, your rescue is not dependent on anything you do. But when my mercy touches you, when my tender compassion touches you, if it really has, it should change you. It should, slowly but surely, it should change you. And so I want us to look at Matthew 18. I'm just going to read a portion of it, but give a little bit of the what's going on here. Basically, this is Jesus telling a parable, telling a story. It's not something that really happened, but it's his way of conveying something about himself and how he wants us to live. He's responding to Peter in Matthew 18, asking, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Drawing on some law teaching. Jesus says, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. His point is like, look, it's you're going to lose count. And you should. And he goes on to tell this story about an unforgiving servant. He says there was this guy who had this crazy debt that was basically he couldn't work himself out of it, which is what people would do at this time. They would actually voluntarily put themselves into slavery to pay debts. And he was so much in debt to this boss of his that he was going to have to sell his wife and kids into slavery as well. And so he's just like begging and pleading, please, like anything, but don't make me do that. And so this guy says, okay, he has mercy. He has tender compassion for him. And he says, you know what, it's as if he didn't have any debt. And he just lets him go. And then this guy turns around. And he has somebody working for him. And he says, or goes on to say that this guy owed him, the guy who had gotten released of this amazing, crazy debt, he owed him 100 denarii, which is basically a day's wages. So he owed him about, just take a third of whatever you make in a year. That's what this guy owed him, right? So it's not nothing, but it's like you can pay that off, right? That's not that. It might take a couple years, but you can get there. And he begins to choke him, it says. And he won't forgive him. And he ends up throwing him into prison. And then this is what his boss says to him, the guy who forgave him. What we have here on the screen. Then his master summoned him and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Then should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant as I have mercy on you? Again, there's no condition for God's mercy for you, but he's saying if you really actually know it, and it might be a good sign that you don't really know it, or that you are really out of touch with his mercy in your life. If you find yourself like this, if you're in a place where you're really struggling to have tender compassion for someone who's either hurt you or who is hurting. Those are kind of 2 categories for mercy. Those who have hurt you or those who are hurting. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever that might be. And so the questions that we're going to process through for this time is, who am I struggling to forgive? This one doesn't take a whole lot of reflecting. Who am I struggling to forgive? And actually what I've asked a few of our members to do is just be available for prayer. So we have a few, and if I've asked you if you would just make your way over here to the side, they're going to be available for prayer during this time. Just oftentimes we can just get stuck in a rut of bitterness and unforgiveness. And we need a fresh movement and power of the Spirit of God to push us out of that, to actually lay hold of His mercy and love and forgiveness in our life. And so they're here just to pray for you. Say, look, I mean, I'm just feeling stuck in some unforgiveness, and I just want you to pray for me. You don't have to give it to the details, or you can, whatever you want to do, but they would like to pray for you. But just like we've done the last few times, you can just stay where you're at. If you want to spread out again, you can do that. Just spend some time praying, reflecting. But if you're like, man, I feel stuck, I want somebody to pray for me, and they're here to pray for me. And then another thing is just, my debt with God is greater than anyone's debt with me. And that's one of these mercy concepts that we have to lay hold of like, just, even though it doesn't feel like it, and it shouldn't feel like it, because anytime someone hurts you, it is painful, but just underlying that is this trust and belief that whatever someone else has done to me is not worse than what me and my sin has done to God. That's where the rub is to believe that. So ask God to help you believe and invite us. So let's spend some time reflecting on this, praying, and if you'd like to receive prayer, they'd be happy to pray for you. this last, for offering prayer, guys. For this last one, where this lands is, I want to bring us back to where we started the Beatitude. We've kind of gone all over the place. I want to bring us back to Matthew 5:7. And this, that being merciful brings Jesus' kingdom to earth as it is in heaven. If God's deepest, truest heart starts with mercy, starts with tender compassion, if that's what's in heaven, the place where anywhere that he rules and reigns completely, if that's what it's like there, then any time that you receive mercy, you're getting touched with heaven. Anytime that you give mercy, you are pushing back the domain of hell and darkness and the powers of this world, and you are pushing heaven in. And it's the last thing that the enemy wants, right? He wants the prince of this age, right? He wants to have it ruled by unforgiving, wicked servants who have been forgiven and received mercy, but who have this check in their heart, and they can never get to a part or to a place where they can extend that again, either whether that's someone who's hurt you or someone who is hurting. Either one of those, the tender compassion to see someone has hurt me, but I'm going to choose to, I can't forget what they've done, but I'm going to forgive them. I'm going to let that go. And that takes pain on your part. That takes you paying a price. I'm going to be willing to pay that price, even if it's just in my own spirit, my own heart, because Jesus has done that very thing for me. And I'm going to be willing to, even though I might feel like someone's hustling me. I mean, you think about Mercy Compassion Ministries, that's not for the faint of heart. That is not for just weak people. This is like, I mean, you look at Mother Teresa, these are strong, courageous, bold people who really step into mercy and compassion ministry. And, it takes a lot to put yourself in a place where you are willing to get hurt and maybe to be hustled. Because you've done the very same thing to God. You play games with him too. And so you're willing to step into that place with other people. But it's not necessarily easy, and don't, the more you step into it, don't think, well, just I'm doing the role of favor, and so this is going to be, anytime you start taking ground for the enemy, well, now you're on the front line, so of course you're going to start getting shot at by him. But it's worth it because it brings Jesus' kingdom to earth, more on earth as it is in heaven. And so what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to throw these questions up on the screen, and just for the sake of time to keep us moving, if you want to either jot those down or you just want to take a photo of it, if my big head is not in the way, for just to reflect on this week, I'll just read them. And just maybe something for you this week. How do I see, and this is just you personally, just in your own words or this place in your life, how do I see mercy as an expression of Jesus and his kingdom? And do I need to grow in tenderness or in courage/strength in regards to showing mercy? You might be very closed-handed. You might always be cynical and skeptical of other people. And maybe God's saying, look, you need to be willing to get hustled a couple times to be able to show up for someone who's in need. Or maybe you have a bleeding heart, and that's a great thing, but God isn't asking you just to get pummeled and to get totally just invaded and dominated. Maybe you need to say, God, what's it look like to step into courage and strength a little bit? To be able to know where my boundaries are, to be able to know when to say no, and to ask God for help in those ways. So I'll send you out with those things. But what I want us to move into now is to come to the table. If anything is going to help you or I grow in mercy, and not only receiving it from God, but also giving it to others, is to come again and again and again to Jesus' table, where he says, remember me, I was broken for you, and my blood was shed for you. So that's what we're going to do. If you're here, whether or not you're a member of our church or not, but if you place your faith in Jesus, then we welcome you to come to the table. If you are here, you're not a Christian, you don't identify with that, we're so glad you're here, but we just ask that you remain seated during this time, think and pray about what you've heard, passages, anything that's maybe come to mind, God might be speaking to you. So listen to that. But this is something that we see that Jesus is inviting his disciples to do. so spend that time with us. So we have two tables here. You can either take the prepackaged, or we do have the bread in the cup. You can take the bread, dip it in the cup, and then you can spread out. I'm going to just have some space, and we go back to your seat. And then we have both sides. So what I would encourage you to do is come from the outside on either side and come through that way, and then make your way back to your seat through the center. So come that way as you go to the table. And let's do that. Let's come feast on Christ in your hearts by faith and be thankful.
Do you feel the world is burning? Lord is worthy. It's so good to see each of you today. Just want to thank you for being here. Especially if it's your first time, just want to say welcome. We're really thankful that you're here. One way that we would like to stay in contact with you is if you have the worship guide. If you don't, there are more up in the front. But if you take out this flap, it's the connection card. If you could fill that out for us, bring it over to the big orange sign that says first time guest. And we would love to just say thank you for being here and give you a goodie bag with a t-shirt just to say, yeah, thanks for being here. Also, there's a couple of announcements on the back of your worship guide. Summer families are happening right now. They started this last week, so don't worry, you haven't only missed 1 week if you haven't been. And you're welcome to keep coming. It's a way that we here at Antioch strive to live life like Jesus, to be with Jesus and to be with people who know him and love him. And so there's a few nights that those are offered. Look online, get signed up. We'd love for you to be there. Another thing that's coming up, fall campus interns need to apply by July 18th. So if you know what that is, if you don't know what that is, no worries. Basically, if you are a university student and you want to be poured into by Antioch staff, and you want to be around, you want to be in the thick of it, you can apply to this if you're a university student. So we would love to have you join us in that. And then we're going to continue in worship through giving. The Lord has been so merciful to us. If you've heard anything today, I hope that's what you've heard. And so one way that we continue to worship him is through giving back to the Lord who's given us so much. So there will be a number on the screen. You can also give online. But yeah, it helps us continue the ministry that the Lord is doing at Antioch. So thank you for being with us today. We're excited that you're here.
We'll stand one more time. We're going to close with doxology. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
Receive this benediction now as we go from the very end of Micah, chapter 7, verse 18 through 20. Who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity and passing over transgression for the remnant of his inheritance? He does not retain his anger forever, because he delights in steadfast love. He will again have compassion on us. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. You will cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. You will show faithfulness to Jacob and steadfast love to Abraham, as you have sworn to our fathers from the days